It's July the 4th. Yes, it's Independence Day in the USA. It's Talking Pints. I'm joined by Greg Swenson, who was, of course, chairman of Republicans Overseas here in London. And, Greg, it's very good to see you.
Here's to it.
On this great
Happy
American
4th.
Day.
Happy 4th.
Now, of course, it's a public holiday.
That's
Marches,
right.
Parades, all these amazing things that go on in America on this day. We don't know much about it yet.
Yeah.
But we understand there's been a shooting at a parade somewhere in Illinois. Do you know much about this yet or not?
I don't know the details, but it's in Highland Park, Illinois, which is a beautiful suburb on the North Shore. I lived one town further up than Highland Park. I know the town really well and know a lot of people there. It's absolutely tragic. On July 4th, the kids were getting ready for the parades, and it sounds really horrible. Although I have not seen. I mean,
there's no detail, but we
nothing on the shooter, nothing on no details yet.
Now, generally, July the 4th. I mean, right across the states, it's a huge families getting together.
It's fantastic. It's I'd say after Christmas and Thanksgiving, it's the biggest holiday, and Memorial Day is more solemn. You're honoring veterans and those who sacrificed. 4th of July is completely celebratory.
Well, let's be honest.
And it's another day off in summer.
Is getting rid of King George III and the Brits, isn't it?
It was a rebellion against Parliament and King George III. I mean,
violent rebellion.
It was the first Brexit. Yeah, it was really. Look, and it's interesting, but I remind people often that it was the Declaration of Independence. This beautiful document was written by Englishmen and based on a lot of history, based on some of the things that were written before the Declaration, the famous Declaration, I think it was in 1689, the English Declaration, thank you. And John Locke was a massive influence, the English political philosopher. Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense.
Yes.
He had just moved to America. So here was this Englishman, new in town, and decided this is a better model.
Then when you go on to the formation of the American Constitution, you take a heck of a lot from Magna Carta.
Absolutely, yeah.
I went to see one of the original copies of that last Thursday up in Lincoln,
great.
which is I'd never done it before, a very special thing to do. So you take a heck of a lot from us, even though you forcibly remove us.
Yes.
We do leave something behind.
It's amazing that a band of farmers decided to pick up some muskets and take on, at that time, the greatest military that had ever been assembled.
The Redcoats.
Because they raised their taxes. And they said, no, this is not going to happen. So it's a great story about the American
taxation
spirit.
Without representation.
That's right.
And these are phrases that echo down the centuries, aren't they?
And of course you had, the great philosophers here at the time that were actually supporting the colonies.
Yeah.
And, you mentioned Thomas Paine. Common Sense was the best-selling book in American history after the Bible, adjusted for population. And prior to that, most Americans didn't want to leave. They wanted to be subjects of the king. They wanted to stay British subjects. And after Thomas Paine circulated that bestseller, Common Sense, everybody kind of bought into it. And it really changed it. And here was an Englishman convincing the colonists.
It wasn't an easy birth, was it?
No.
Because there was no common currency across what was America in those days. And you're kind of 60, 70 years in, and you have one of the bloodiest civil wars that's been known to man. I mean, it wasn't an easy birth, was it?
It never is. But it shows that the founders and the great documents, again, written by basically Englishmen, were built to survive. And they knew there would be hiccups. They knew that even when they wrote those documents, they knew that the slavery thing was going to rear its ugly head. That wasn't going away. But yet the institutions that were built to survive, and they work.
And
still to this
the Constitution,
day.
Still the Constitution, and of course it gets its amendments from time to time, but still the Constitution means a heck of a lot. And do you think that's
really
being taught? Is that being taught in American schools
Not
in the way
enough.
perhaps it was when you were at school?
No, not enough. And I think we have to stop teaching our children garbage, CRT and pronoun choices and all this insanity, and get back to teaching civics and history. That's really much more important.
Because America is not a national democracy, is it? It's a republic.
No, it's a republic, yeah.
Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, it just means that it's Tocqueville, and I think Jefferson used it often, said, beware the tyranny of the majority. It wasn't built to be a referendum, and because what if the majority was mistreating minorities?
So the small states,
small states should have
protection against the bigger states. That's basically how it works.
It was originally designed to make sure that the southern states didn't have too much power. They wanted to make sure there was equal number of votes, essentially, from the north and the south. But it also meant smaller western. They wanted to encourage the frontier, that the western states that weren't going to be populated very much, and to this day really aren't. When
you fly over in daytime. When you fly out over the Midwest, over the Rockies, and I remember flying over Utah late spring.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no habitation for hundreds of square miles.
It's fantastic. It's part of the culture. It's part of the fabric. And they didn't want the majority, where, let's say, people, and we see it today, people in Washington and New York and L.A., you surely don't want them to ignore the will of the people that live in different places.
Flyover states.
Flyover land.
The deplorables.
Right? And the deplorables, yeah. But it was really built to protect minorities, whatever those minorities might be, whether they're racial or ethnic minorities or regional minorities, farmers versus city people. So it was really important to make sure that there was protection.
Well, the Indians
so it was a republic.
Bad deal, didn't they?
They got a bad deal. Yeah, by the English.
Yeah. You're blaming us for that, are you?
The Americans kept that mistreatment going for a long time. So there's no doubt. I mean, look, it's not a perfect country. And as Churchill has often said, but it's the best. It's the best of the only options, right? So, look, it's flawed. It's an imperfect country, but it's the greatest country in the world, and always will be.
It emerges, doesn't it? When you think about it, the Civil War's over, things have settled down. Mm-hmm. America is beginning to have a presence on the world stage, but only very gently. Suddenly, World War I, World War II, and those two events drive America into being the global superpower.
Yes, it was the end of empire for the United Kingdom, unfortunately. The pound was replaced by the dollar. The Americans became, the global superpower, leading the Western democracies. Yeah, I mean, it took a while. I think, but I think that's why I mentioned the founders and the documents are timeless. Knowing there'd be some bumps in the road, knowing that it was a vast, expansion. It was 13 states when this whole thing started.
The whole thing was an experiment.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet, in spite of all the bumps in the road, the founders and the documents survive, and it's important to respect that. And look what happened 250 years later.
Under the rule of law and via the Constitution. And I just don't want today for us to be party political, particularly. I think it's not the right day for that. We're talking about America today, and of course there have always been different shades of opinion.
Sure.
But Greg, I don't know. It does seem to me that some of the divisions in America now, almost hatreds. Not I disagree with you.
Right.
Next Tuesday we're going to go and sort this out at the ballot box. Yeah. But I disagree with, and I hate you.
Yeah.
How worried are you about American cities, about law and order, about this intolerance?
It needs to be fixed. And I think
Can it be fixed?
Yes, it can be fixed. The cavalry's around the corner, first of all. I mean, you're going, again, we don't have to get in too much into the red-blue, but you're going to see a massive landslide election in November in the midterms. And that's setting up very nicely for 2024. We need to get back to a bit of law and order. We don't need necessarily new laws. We need to enforce the laws that we have. And I'm all for new laws if they make sense, but right now this is a two-part problem. One is we're wasting time and energy on silliness, on teaching children silly things in school and ignoring the important things.
But social media plays a big role in this too.
It does.
I mean, I agree with you on education, and we've got the similar problems here. But actually, the power of those big tech companies.
And so there's some things that need to be fixed. But if you look at what's important to Americans, it's not what the Twitter mob is saying. It's not what people in Washington, the salons of Georgetown or New York or L.A. or San Francisco. It's really not what they think, because they're feeding into the same mob. It's what the rest of the country, it's what flyover land thinks. And they actually do have a view. And that's what you're going to see in November, and you'll see it again in 2024. 2020 was an aberration because you had COVID, you had all these different reasons. But it's a center-right country, and I think the flaw right now is, and I'm already seeing it flip. So that's why I'm optimistic, Nigel, and I'm confident. The DA, his name was Chesa Bodine, probably butchered it, in San Francisco. He was one of these George Soros-endorsed district attorneys, which are controlling New York, Chicago, L.A., San Francisco. He was recalled.
I couldn't keep you off politics for longer.
Yeah, sorry. He was recalled. There was a recall election.
Yeah.
And this is in San Francisco, which is basically 90% Democrat. And it's not Democrat, it's progressive left Democrat.
Yeah.
He was recalled. He didn't just lose a re-election. He was called out of office. 60% of San Franciscans voted to recall him, 60 to 40. That's a massive move. And what that tells me is that the people, red or blue, Republican or Democrat, San Francisco, which is all Democrat, basically said enough.
So there's a safety mechanism. There are safety mechanisms here. Well, I pray that's right.
Right.
Greg, now here you are, all-American patriot, deeply into your American history, but you're living in London.
Yes.
Is that because the business opportunities are great here, or is it because culturally it sort of feels like home?
Well, it's a little bit of both. It's a great place. It's our number one partner in terms of foreign direct investment. It's our number one partner in terms of strategic military. Of course, it's a natural place for Americans. That's why there are so many American expats here. I also do a lot of business in Africa, and this is the financial capital of Africa. So many reasons to be here. But
US, I mean, Biden has a bit of a problem with us. It's the Irish thing that I think he's misread, frankly, to some degree. But do you think our relations are as good as they ever have been? Or have they deteriorated a bit?
I think it's just a little speed bump, Nigel. It is a speed bump. It will be back. Mike Pompeo was in town today making the rounds. It was fantastic. No, this relationship is long-term. And so there is a bump in the road now.
Yeah, and presidents come, presidents go, prime ministers come, prime ministers go. But that relationship and the cultural connection, the cultural connection is incredible. I think when you look at music, art, literature, we're kind of all listening to, watching the same things. The only thing you haven't got is cricket, of course, which is because you left us.
That's why we have baseball.
Yeah, you left us all those years ago. So, living in London, is this you long-term, staying here in London?
Yeah, I love it. My business is here. I love the political scene. I love doing this kind of stuff. My wife loves it here, Mary Ellen. So she's thrilled. So, yeah, this is home. This is home for sure. And we get back to the States a lot. Both of our children live in the U.S., New York and Chicago. So
and now we can all fly again?
Yeah, at 25% higher prices,
Well, I guess fuel has gone up.
Fuel has doubled. It's a tough July 4th weekend for a lot of people. Air travel's up 25%. Fuel's up 100% since Biden took office. Sorry. Hamburger meat 36%. Chicken 33%. Lemonade 22%. Fireworks 35%.
Wow.
This is a tough
fireworks. I mean, July the 4th. You need your fireworks.
Exactly.
Over there.
It's crazy. So I think this will be a belt tightening holiday weekend. I think help is around the corner. I hope we can fix things, and we will.
Similar problems here.
Very similar, and the same causes actually. It's just that in America you'd expect this from a left-leaning or a Democratic administration. I was hoping that you wouldn't get it from a so-called conservative administration here in the UK.
These people aren't conservative, are they?
No, because they've governed as bad or worse than Biden. Biden tried to get the tax on profits through in America, knew he couldn't get it passed. But, Boris and Rishi have done it here.
Taxes out. Great.
Windfall taxes never work.
Well, I have to say, I would argue that very strongly, and you put a windfall tax on one industry, and who's to say it's not another industry next? Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Talking Pints. I know you appear on GBNews quite regularly over the course of our first year, and happy July the 4th.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much indeed.